Hi, welcome to UDTV. My name's Heath Stone, and as a person living with type 1 diabetes for almost 30 years, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to read and understand what the labels and nutritional facts are telling us about the food we buy. I'm constantly counting my carbs to manage my insulin requirements with the food I consume. So I want to ask you, do you read the labels or even understand what they are saying? Do you know how to calculate your net carbs? Food and nutrition labels can be very misleading. So today, we're going to focus on how to read nutrition labels so you can have more confidence in knowing what you're buying and the carbs. The key element to be clear on as a person that's focused on managing your diabetes and your blood sugar levels are the serving sizes, and that's what's being referenced at the top of the label, and the amount of net carbohydrates, which is the total carbohydrates minus the fiber. To know the amount of total carbs you need to account for requires you to just multiply how many servings you're going to consume in one meal by the total net carbs. Knowing this is critical in your diabetes management. So by understanding what we're eating and its impact on our blood sugar, we are able to effectively adjust our insulin, our medications, and actually maintain our energy, our health, and performance in our day. So, as we were preparing today's episode, I felt it would be good to share a video on how misleading labels can be from a mentor and person I respect, Dr. Eric Berg. I subscribe to his channel and feel he is a solid source of science-backed information. I highly recommend him and his YouTube channel. So, if you're interested in learning about specific foods, keto diets, intermittent fasting, and much more, and how these all impact your health, I do recommend that you check out Dr. Berg. Remember, all the information we're going to provide for you is education, training, and entertainment purposes only. Check with your doctor before you make any changes to your routines. I know you're going to find this video helpful and informative.
Today I'm going to talk about some interesting ways that manufacturing companies can trick people when you're reading nutritional facts or on the label. Now, I'm not going to talk about the front of the packaging, where they'll use things like farm fresh or free range or natural. I'm primarily going to talk about what's on the back of the label. There's a lot of things on this label, but we're going to do a deep dive into real specific, important points that you need to know about. The first thing is the serving size. Realize that when you're looking at the different values, especially total carbohydrates, net carbs, sugars, realize that those figures are per serving size, not the whole container. So you really have to look at what is in a serving size, okay? What is in the whole container? How many serving sizes are you going to consume in that meal? And then multiply that times the total net carb. Because if you don't, you can very easily be misled, because some of these products have like 33 serving size, and you might eat the whole box of something and think you're okay when you're not really okay. All right, the next point is regarding trans fats. That's under total fats at the top. And here's the standard. If you have trans fats of less than a half of a gram, which is less than 500 milligrams, you can make your trans fats as 0. So remember the serving size. If your serving size is 30, for example, and there is like 499 milligrams of trans fats per serving size, and you eat the whole box, guess what? You're getting a lot of trans fats without knowing it. So how do you know you have trans fats? Well, you go to the bottom part where it says ingredients, and you look for two words. One is hydrogenated, and the other is partially hydrogenated. If it has either one of those two words, then you know there's trans fats in this product. All right, the next part I'm going to talk about is the most important part of this video. And it's really understanding carbohydrates and what that means, okay? So you have the total carbohydrates. And then underneath that, you have dietary fiber. And underneath that, you have total sugars. And then you're also supposed to see the added sugars. And then under that, you may see sugar alcohols. So sugar alcohols are sweeteners that don't apparently increase insulin too much. So they are not classified under sugars. They're instead classified as sugar alcohols. Now, let me just switch over to net carbs. What is a net carb? A net carb is you take the total carb and you minus the fiber. That will give you this net carb. And that's basically what you're going to be using to be in keto. In other words, to be in keto, the net carb needs to be below 50 grams per day. Now, this might sound pretty easy to understand and follow and implement, but there's a couple tricks that manufactured companies use to make these values look more favorable. Let's talk about the first trick. Okay, maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is mostly a polysaccharide. What is a polysaccharide? That's a starch, okay? And so starch is a series of sugars that are attached together. And so starch is not classified under sugars. It's under total carbohydrate. And the way this is classified is this. If you have a polysaccharide, okay, a starch, you don't have to put it under sugars. If it's a disaccharide, which is two connecting sugars, or a monosaccharide, which is one sugar like glucose, it needs to be classified under sugars. But because maltodextrin is classified as a polysaccharide, it doesn't have to be listed under sugars, despite acting like a sugar, okay? Because if you look at the glycemic index, maltodextrin is like way, way higher than sugar. It's higher than glucose. Maltodextrin is between 106 and 136. It's way the heck up there. Now, that's because it gets absorbed in the stomach a lot faster than sugar. And that's probably because it's far from being natural. The way that they make maltodextrin is using all sorts of chemical processes that break down cornstarch. Now, it could also be tapioca. It can also be wheat. It can also be potato, rice, but it's usually cornstarch. And then they heat it under high pressures using certain chemicals, and they come out with this maltodextrin. And maltodextrin is in so many products. And if maltodextrin does have some disaccharide or monosaccharide, that is supposed to be in the sugars. However, you can go to Amazon right now and buy maltodextrin and look at the back of the label. You'll see that it has no sugar. It's all carbohydrate. That means it's all starch. And the problem with that is that a lot of times they'll advertise this product with less than 1 gram of sugar or no sugar, but it has a lot of carbohydrate that acts like sugar, even worse than sugar. And the other interesting thing is maltodextrin many times is not used to sweeten something. It's used as a flow agent to help dry out certain extracts, even like stevia, for example. And if that per serving size is less than 1/2 gram of maltodextrin, that can be considered as 0. So in other words, you could be getting maltodextrin without even knowing you're getting it, if it's less than 500 milligrams per serving size. Now, everything that I talked about maltodextrin, that also applies to dextrin, because dextrin is also a polysaccharide, a starch that can act like sugar, but it's not classified as a sugar. It's a starch under the total carbs. So you just want to avoid any products with maltodextrin or dextrin. Now, to make things even more complex, you also have something called resistant maltodextrin, okay? Now, this is classified as a fiber. In other words, manufacturing companies have found a way to turn this polysaccharide, this starch, maltodextrin, into a fiber chemically. So it's an isolated, chemically made, they call it functional fiber. And now they're positioning functional fibers as a health benefiting ingredient. And so you have soluble corn fiber, which basically is resistant maltodextrin, tapioca fiber, which is resistant maltodextrin. These are all fibers and not classified under sugars, and they are deducted from the total carbohydrate. So you can have a lot of these new fibers in your ingredient that basically are not even calculated in this equation because they're deducted out with the fiber. Now, the question is, do they affect your blood sugars? Well, there's studies that say that they might, but the problem is these new functional fibers are new to our diet, and a lot of people are having a lot of digestive problems, inflammation, bloating, gas, diarrhea. And so the jury is still out. And personally, I would stick with fiber that comes from real food, like vegetables. There is a big difference between an isolated synthesized fiber and fiber that comes from nature with all the other factors that work synergistically. And just think about the source of these fibers, like wheat, for example, or corn, or potato, or rice, or tapioca. And I'm not going to even get into whether they're GMO or not at this point. All right, so that's the fiber part. Let's touch on the sugar alcohols for a second. Remember I told you that sugar alcohols can also be deducted, just like fiber, from total carbs to get your net carbs? Well, there are certain sugar alcohols that definitely will spike your blood sugars and create a problem. And the big one is maltitol. But you also have sorbitol and mannitol. Now, xylitol can affect the blood sugars to some degree, but not as much as the other ones. The only sugar alcohol that I know that doesn't affect your blood sugars is erythritol. So even though these sugar alcohols are deducted from the total carbohydrates, giving you the net carb, your blood sugars can still be affected. And on top of that, let's say some of this fiber or functional fiber resistant starch that you consume, it's creating a lot of digestive issues. Well, the stress in your digestive system could potentially elevate your blood sugars. Why? Because of all the inflammation that's created. Now, one side note, when you bake things that are keto friendly using erythritol, they usually add stevia or monk fruit, okay? In addition, they're also adding maltodextrin to that. So if you're gonna get a sweetener, make sure you get the ones that don't have the maltodextrin or dextrin. Maltodextrin many times is not even that sweet, but it's there as a filler. It gives you the mouthfeel. It gives you a certain texture, very similar to fat, but it sure acts like a carbohydrate. So we're looking at this label and we're trying to get this net carb. It's very important to understand the type of carb that's in this product, okay? Because if we're gonna try to do the healthy version of keto, we want healthy ingredients. And so that number, 50 grams net carb, should be quality, nutrient-dense carbohydrates. And all these resistant starches just don't have the nutrient values compared to regular real food. Now, another way that manufacturer companies trick people is with this whole grains, right? I mean, just take a look in the grocery store, all these cereals. And I'm talking about the worst cereals that you could eat, you know, filled with sugars. Right at the top, it says whole grain. And of course, people think that that gives some benefit. But what about all the other things that are added to the whole grain, right? I mean, to make it taste good. Of course, you got sugars, chemicals, preservatives, not to mention the whole grain is ground into flour. And who knows how long it's been oxidized or sitting on some shelf before it's turned into some product. I mean, these delicate vitamins, these fat-soluble vitamins in grains are highly susceptible to oxygen and heat, and they can go rancid really fast. And then when they're put into a product and they sit on the shelf for a period of time, you're consuming a product that has very, very low levels of nutrients. So just because something says 100% whole grains doesn't mean they're 100% healthy. Now, the other point I want to bring up is that when you look at some of these keto-friendly products, they actually put in there like wheat gluten, right? Well, yeah, that's a protein, but so many people have a gluten intolerance and they're going to have a lot of digestive issues from that type of protein. And then you have soy protein isolates. Probably one of the lowest quality sources of protein that you can get is soy protein isolates. It's just not a natural thing that we're supposed to eat. Another point about sweeteners, even keto-friendly foods have sugar in them, but they will have low amounts of sugar. And many times that sugar is not even cane sugar, it's beet sugar. And 95% of all beet sugar is GMO. So it has traces of glyphosate, which is the herbicide they spray when you have GMO products. Now, the same thing with wheat. Wheat is not GMO, but they still sometimes spray it with glyphosate. And I want to touch on non-GMO for a second. It does not mean genetically modified organism free. It's listed as non-GMO, project verified. So basically, they go through a series of standards that they must meet. They don't necessarily test them to see if there's actually GMO organisms or byproducts in the product. It's a checklist that they follow which lowers the risk of having GMO foods in that product. So non-GMO Project Verified does not mean absolutely 100% free of GMOs. And the last point I'm going to bring up is this point about antibiotics. When a product says no antibiotics, it doesn't mean that there hasn't been antibiotics used. You just can't use antibiotics past the second day of life. But as far as eggs go, if an egg has not been hatched yet, or let's say it's been hatched and that chick is alive for 1 day and it's given antibiotics, but then from the second day on, no antibiotics, it could be classified as no antibiotics, even though it was given antibiotics on the first day. Now, if something is classified as no growth promoting antibiotics, that doesn't mean they're not using antibiotics. They're just using antibiotics for different purposes, not necessarily for growing the chicken, but for other reasons, like the chicken is sick. And when they say no medically important antibiotics, that means that they're not using antibiotics that are used for humans, but they can use other types of antibiotics that are not for humans, but for animals. So I just want to talk about and list several tricks that manufacturing companies use to get you to buy their products. And I really highly suggest you start reading labels right now and apply this information. Now, I think the best next video for you to watch would be the one on organic food. Check it out. I put it right here.
Wow, that's a lot of information, I know. But what I got to tell you is that reading our labels, understanding what we're eating, is a real key element to our health. So how is it that we do that? Well, we have to take accountability for our health. We have to take accountability to understand the carbs, to understand how the sugar is working within our body, how all the other things that Dr. Berg mentioned, such as, antibiotics and the different types of sugars and sugar alcohols, and how the label is used to portray a certain amount of information to us. We need to take accountability for that. Well, what we do at Uncommon Diabetic Solutions is actually help you. We work with you so that you're not alone, that together we can. And I really want to ask you, are you someone that wants to transform your life? Are you wanting to take accountability? Are you that leader that's achieved most of your goals, but you're looking in the mirror and you just don't recognize the person you see anymore? You are successful, but you want more. You want your health back. Don't feel alone. You don't have to anymore. You just need to know that others understand what you don't know. And I go and seek information from people that know more than I do, like a Dr. Berg. So my question is very simple. Do you feel alone and don't have anyone that understands your diabetes challenges? Are you ready to reset your life, get a decade of energy, health, and performance back? So if you've said yes to any of these questions, I want to invite you to journey with me to build your uncommon form of life. And together we can. We can create a map for you. That's a massive action plan to build the foundations that will improve your energy, your health, and your performance, starting right now. So join me to reset your foundations of health. Just click the link below to book a free one-on-one session with myself and discuss how together we can build the foundations of your uncommon form of life. I really want to thank you for joining us today. And if you like the content, give me a like and click the subscribe button and bell so you don't miss any episodes of UDTV. Remember, you're not alone. Take advantage of my free foundation strategy session and transform your life. Until next week, be uncommon.